Tonight, we are not talking about bombs falling from the sky or tanks rolling across borders. We are talking about something far quieter, far subtler, yet potentially far more explosive: a map. Because in global politics, maps are not innocent. They are not neutral. They are statements of power, memory, and intent. And when China quietly released its latest official map, something shifted deep inside the world's most fragile alliance. There was no dramatic announcement from Beijing, no fiery speech, no breaking news alert flashing across screens. The map was published calmly, officially, almost casually, as part of what Chinese authorities described as a routine update. But in geopolitics, there is no such thing as routine. Every line matters, every name matters, every omission matters, and this map carried a message that Moscow could not ignore. Observers noticed that several locations inside Russia's Far East were labeled not only with their modern Russian names, but with historical Chinese names as well. Cities, rivers, regions that today sit firmly under Russian sovereignty were suddenly being framed through a different historical lens. To an average viewer, this might seem harmless. To diplomats and strategists, it felt like a warning wrapped in cartography, because names on a map are never just names. They are reminders of past control, past loss, and past ambition. The regions in question lie along the vast border between China and Russia, an area shaped by centuries of shifting empires, unequal treaties, and silent resentment. In the 19th century, a weakened Qing dynasty was forced to sign treaties that transferred enormous stretches of territory to Imperial Russia. Those lands eventually became what we now call Russia's Far East. For decades, Beijing officially accepted those borders, at least on paper. But history has a long memory, and China has never fully erased that chapter from its national consciousness. When this new map appeared, it reignited a question that many believed had been buried forever. Is China quietly reminding Russia that these lands were once Chinese? Inside Moscow, the reaction was not loud, but it was tense. There were no public condemnations from the Kremlin, no angry press conferences, but silence in this case was not calm. It was calculation, because Vladimir Putin understands something very well. Maps are political weapons. They are often the first move in a much longer game. For years, Russia and China have presented themselves as strategic partners, united against what they describe as Western dominance. They stand together in international forums. They conduct joint military exercises. They speak the language of a multipolar world. But alliances built on convenience are fragile, and history shows that great powers rarely stay comfortable sharing influence forever. This map cracked the surface of that reality. From Beijing's perspective, the move was subtle, almost elegant. There was no official claim that Russian territory belonged to China today. No explicit demand, no legal challenge, just historical naming, just context, just ink on paper. But everyone in Moscow understood what it implied. China remembers, and China wants Russia to remember that China remembers. For Putin, this was deeply uncomfortable. Russia's Far East is not just land. It is strategic depth. It is access to the Pacific. It is rich in natural resources. It is sparsely populated. And it sits next to a China that is economically, demographically, and industrially far stronger than Russia today. Moscow has long worried quietly about becoming the junior partner in its relationship with Beijing. This map fed directly into that fear, because when a stronger partner starts highlighting historical claims, even indirectly, it shifts the balance of psychological power. Chinese officials dismissed concerns, insisting the map was simply a standard publication reflecting historical and linguistic accuracy. But that explanation did little to calm nerves. In international politics, intention is judged not by words but by timing, and the timing could not have been worse for Russia. Moscow is already stretched thin. The war in Ukraine has drained resources, exposed weaknesses, and isolated Russia from much of the West. Sanctions have bitten deep. Russia now depends heavily on China for trade, technology, and diplomatic cover. That dependency changes everything, and Beijing knows it. By releasing this map now, China sent a quiet but unmistakable message. Russia may be a partner, but it is not an equal. History, power, and leverage all favor Beijing. Maps have played this role before. Long before the first shot is fired, borders are questioned on paper. Narratives are reshaped. Public perception is slowly adjusted. It is the softest form of pressure, and often the most effective. For Putin, who built his political identity around restoring Russian strength and territorial integrity, the symbolism cuts deep. He rose to power, promising never to allow Russia to be humiliated again. Yet here was an ally, gently but unmistakably touching a historical wound. And this is where the real tension lies, not in whether China will ever openly claim Russian territory. That would be reckless and destabilizing. The real issue is leverage, influence, the reminder that China has options, memories, and patience. This map did not redraw borders, but it redrew perceptions. It reminded the world that alliances are not friendships. They are transactions. And when power shifts, so do the rules. As analysts debate whether this was a calculated move or a bureaucratic oversight, one thing is certain. In the Kremlin, it was noticed, it was discussed, and it was not forgotten. Because once history is placed back on the map, it rarely stays there quietly. What made this moment even more unsettling was not what Beijing said, but what Moscow did not say. The Kremlin chose silence. No official protest, no sharp rebuttal, no public demand for clarification. And in Russian political culture, silence is never accidental. It is strategic. It means the issue is too sensitive to mishandle, too dangerous to address impulsively. Behind closed doors, this map landed like a cold reminder of reality. Russia today is not the Soviet Union. Its economy is smaller than China's by a massive margin. Its population is shrinking while China's, despite slowing growth, remains overwhelmingly larger. Its industrial base is strained, its military consumed by Ukraine, and its diplomatic options narrowed. China, meanwhile, is patient, methodical, and deeply aware of time as a weapon. This is why maps matter so much. They are not about today, they are about tomorrow. For decades, Russia's Far East has been a quiet anxiety inside the Kremlin. Vast lands, few people, endless resources. And just across the border, Chinese cities buzzing with life, factories, infrastructure, and millions of people. Officially, the border is settled. Unofficially, Russian strategists have always worried about imbalance. Not invasion, but influence. Not tanks, but dependency. And dependency is exactly where Russia now stands. Since the Ukraine war, China has become Russia's economic lifeline. Energy exports flow east. Trade routes pivot toward Beijing. Russian banks rely on Chinese systems. Russian companies depend on Chinese components. Even diplomatically, China's position matters enormously for Moscow's survival on the global stage. This changes the psychology of the relationship. When you need someone more than they need you, you listen more carefully to what they are not saying. From Beijing's perspective, the map was a masterclass in subtle pressure. No confrontation, no escalation, just a quiet assertion of historical narrative. China has always played the long game. It does not rush, it waits, it tests reactions, it observes silence. And the Kremlin's silence spoke volumes. Because Russia could not afford a public dispute. A loud reaction would have exposed insecurity. It would have signaled weakness. It would have reminded the world that Moscow is no longer the senior power in this partnership. So instead, Russia swallowed the discomfort and moved on, at least publicly. But internally, the unease remains. Putin understands history perhaps better than any modern leader. He has built his worldview on it. He sees nations as living organisms shaped by memory, trauma, and pride. And he knows that once historical narratives are revived, they rarely disappear. They resurface when conditions allow. China knows this too. This is not about reclaiming territory tomorrow. It is about shaping the mental map of the future, teaching audiences slowly and subtly that borders are not eternal, that history is flexible, that power determines legitimacy. And that is what makes this moment so dangerous, because alliances forged in opposition often collapse once the common enemy weakens. Russia and China are aligned largely because they both resist Western dominance. But what happens when that balance shifts further? What happens when China no longer needs Russia as much as Russia needs China? Maps are often the first hint. We have seen this pattern before. Borders questioned quietly, names reintroduced, history emphasized. Then years later, influence expands, economically, culturally, demographically. Control without conquest, pressure without war. For Russia's Far East, this is not theoretical. Chinese investment is already present. Chinese workers already cross borders. Trade already flows one way. The map simply made visible what has been happening invisibly for years. For Putin, this presents a dilemma with no easy answer. Confront China and risk losing a critical partner. Stay silent and accept a gradual erosion of psychological sovereignty. Neither option fits the image of strength he has cultivated for decades. And that is why this map matters more than any press release. It exposed the imbalance. It reminded Moscow that power has shifted east. It signaled that China sees itself not just as Russia's partner, but as a civilization with unfinished historical business. This does not mean war is coming. It means leverage is being recalibrated. In geopolitics, the most dangerous moves are often the quietest ones. Not the explosions, but the revisions. Not the invasions, but the narratives. Not the threats, but the reminders. And this map was exactly that, a reminder. A reminder that history is never settled forever. A reminder that alliances are conditional. A reminder that in a world defined by power, even friends keep score. Russia noticed. Putin noticed. And once noticed, nothing is ever quite the same again. Because when borders reappear on paper, they tend to reappear in minds first, and minds shape the future.